Hi everyone, it's Tech Thursday. I'm Nicole. Cassie is out this morning, so you guys are stuck with me. Sorry I'm a little late. I was making myself some tea. And not that this has anything to do with anything, but I'm a coffee person who really wants to be a tea person. And in case you're one of those people and you're looking for a tea that you might like, I would like to recommend this tea, this Good Earth Sweet and Spicy tea. It's basically like, it's kind of like, you know those little sweethearts, you know those little red hearts that you get around Valentine's Day, except without all the sugar. So it's got a really nice flavor. You wouldn't think that would be good in a tea, but it's actually pretty good. So if you're looking for a tea and you like coffee, try this tea. It's a black tea too, so it's not super like fruity or anything like that. Someone's coming up the stairs. So I am babysitting the co-working space here because Cassie's gone for the morning. Hey, how's it going? I know. I'm in this room. Just doing a little web thing.
Cool.
Yeah, oh, you haven't seen this room?
You're talking to somebody.
Oh, yeah, I'm talking to the internet. It's totally fine.
Sorry.
The internet says, no worries. Cassie's gone for the morning, so I'm just keeping an eye on things, hence the open door. So, welcome. So, anyway, so I thought today, since Cassie wasn't going to be here, that we could talk a little bit about something that I really like, but I think Cassie's sort of like meh about, which is about podcasting. But even before I start, I recommended this tea, and I also want to talk about our workshop that's coming up tomorrow morning. It's here at Anchor Space, which is in downtown Bar Harbor, Maine. So if you happen to be around the coast of Maine and you want to learn a little bit more about taking good pictures with your smartphone, don't worry, I'm not teaching it. There is a local and actually pretty well-known photographer named Jennifer Boer. She does a lot of seascape stuff, but she also does a lot of professional photography, and she's going to be giving the workshop. So it's going to be really good. So I guess the first part of the workshop is going to be about setting up pictures, kind of making them interesting. And then the second part of the workshop is going to be working with photos that you have using apps and that kind of thing, improving lighting, improving contrast, that kind of stuff. So, so you should come. It's going to be fun. It's $25. You get a little bit of breakfast, 2 hours with Jennifer, and you get to come here and hang out with us. So we think that's a pretty good deal. So anyway, on to podcasting, and I'm going to just take out my notes because I'm not as good without notes. So basically, if you're not a podcasting person, basically a podcast is audio files that you listen to on demand. And you can subscribe to different shows and basically listen to them when it's convenient. Unlike the radio, you turn it on, something's playing, you're listening to it or not listening to it. The idea of a podcast is it's something that you can start, pause, finish whenever you want. And there's different shows. So if I listen to a show and I like it, I can subscribe to it. And then every time that show comes out, I get a little update and I can listen to it again. So it's a lot like streaming TV, except it's just audio. And what's convenient about that, of course, is you can be doing other things as you're listening to it. I find sometimes when I watch TV, you know, I kind of, maybe it's like the ADD generation or whatever, you know, they say that us young people always like to be doing something. But when I watch a movie or something, I like to be knitting or, you know, I don't have to be doing something else, but I tend to like to be doing something with my hands. And sometimes if I'm looking down, because I'm not a very good knitter, and sometimes I have to look down, I tend to get a little distracted and I miss something on the screen to go back, rewind, listen to it, that kind of, or rewatch it. So what's nice about just audio content is you're not having to worry about the picture part. You can just listen to the audio part. So podcasts are the only reason that I do dishes, that I fold laundry. I'm trying to think of other things, ironing, any sort of cleaning, like cleaning anything. So this co-working space, I clean it once a week. And while I'm cleaning it, I'm often listening to podcasts. So that's the reason that the bathrooms here get cleaned so regularly. So it's kind of nice to have content like that because we're oftentimes driving in our cars, waiting in line, doing something we don't really want to be doing. And it's nice to just sort of have something going on in the background that's sort of interesting. So, you know, what a lot of people end up doing, of course, with their podcasts is they record them. This is the people who are doing the podcasts. And they'll also not only put them on podcast services like iTunes and Stitcher and iHeartRadio, but they'll also put them as blog content. So people can subscribe to their blog and they can listen to the audio file right on the person's blog. So that's pretty cool. In terms of how people make money with podcasts, it's always kind of interesting. most people, I think, are of the advertiser funding model. So that's to say that this podcast is brought to you by this spicy tea, blah, 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 right? So that's how, and they get 2 or 3 sponsors, and I'm sure pricing has something to do with how many people are watching, how much, what the audience is, like how specific they can be about their audience. So the more specific you can be about your audience, the more money that you can ask for advertising, because you're targeting a specific group of people. So that's how most podcasters make their money, is they'll have and it's funny when you listen to a lot of podcasts, you notice that a lot of them have really similar sponsors. So like audible.com, Blue Apron, a lot of sort of online services tend to advertise with podcasts, and I'll talk about that in a second. So that's one thing, is that you can have the advertiser funding model. Now, the problem with that, of course, is you can only make a certain amount of money. You can't be stopping every 30 seconds to, be plugging a product. It's one thing on a TV show if someone's pouring a bowl of Lucky Charms while they're having a spunky interchange of dialogue. But it's another thing with audio. You can't be constantly inserting advertisements, or it's going to annoy the people that are trying to listen to your show. So another model that people are moving more toward, and you'll notice that also with journalism, websites and things like that, is there's a membership model. So advertiser model, the advertiser is paying to be mentioned or to be featured or something like that on the podcast. And most podcasters, I would say 99.9% of them, mention when something is being mentioned because it's a sponsorship. So advertisers, but now we're moving toward membership. So basically we all pay in a little bit and we get access to more. Most podcasts have a certain amount that is free, and then there's an additional amount for members only. So for example, Dan Savage of the Savage Love Cast, so he gives romance advice. So he gives the first hour of his show is free to everybody. He calls it the micro version. And then he has, what does he call it? The maximum portion for people who pay to be members of this group. And I think it's something even like $5 a month. It's not even expensive. And they get the extra 2 hours or the extra hour of content that the Savage Love Cast produces. They get access to material maybe a little bit early. They might get, certain little gifts or, kind of first dibs on show tickets if, Dan Savage is coming to do a show in their area. So things are switching from advertisers, to which there's a very limited amount, and there's a limited amount of space you can put them in, to members, which you can have basically an unlimited amount of people theoretically like and listen to your podcast and pay a little bit of money every month or once a year to support it. So it's so that's how people make money on podcast, is these things happen. And one of the podcasts I listen to a lot called My Brother and Me, they did an entirely sponsored show about a product. And what they do is they're an advice show too. I really like the advice shows. And they did, it was sponsored by Tostinos, which I guess are like the little pizza rolls. And so they had people send in pizza roll related funny questions and they answered them. So that's the other model. So model 1, advertiser pays for an ad spot. Model 2, members pay and they're part of a larger community. Typically, like I said, there's X amount for free, but the paid membership gets access to more. Also, though, you can have a fully sponsored show and be sort of making funny or interesting content about a particular product, as long as you disclose, of course, that it is sponsored. The entire show was sponsored by this brand. So I see there being different ways of making money with podcasts. Maybe there's more than one going on at the same time, but there is money to be made. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing it. And speaking of that, people are like, oh, okay, well, like who makes these podcasts, right? Well, basically all you need is like a microphone and you could be a podcaster. I mean, it definitely helps to have better audio equipment to control for sound and things like that. Kind of like I'm just using the basic camera that comes with my computer to film this Google Hangout. But if I was going to be like a webinar superstar or something, I might get a better camera. I might improve the lighting in here. I might make it a little bit less echoey. So there, are things that you can definitely invest in to be a better podcaster. But in terms of basic materials, I mean, it's kind of like running, right? Like to be a runner, you basically need a pair of sneakers. I mean, you can get as fancy as you want after that. You can get the fanciest sneakers, you can get the moisture wicking, clothing, you can get the super cool padded socks, but really all you need to start is a pair of sneakers. And it's the same with podcasting. You basically need a microphone and something to talk about. So kind of who started with podcasting is who you'd expect, which is these big media companies, NPR being, the one that's way, ahead of it because they're making radio shows. And let's face it, 7 p.m. on Monday nights, I'm not listening to Fresh Air. Like that's not a good time for me, but I can subscribe to the Fresh Air podcast and listen to that whenever I want. It costs NPR the same amount really to make it once. Why wouldn't they just make it available at a different point if they're storing it online anyway? So a lot of big sort of media companies have been making podcasts for a long time. And they're clearly, they have a lot of different shows. They record frequently, but what's interesting about the space is because there's money to be had, there's also private businesses that are now getting into it. So, there's, the Slate sort of group of podcasts, and I think it's just Slate businesses, but I'm not entirely sure. They have a podcasting company called Panoply. I'm not even entirely sure how to spell that, so I think that's kind of interesting. So they're the Panoply network. My brother and me, which I was talking about, the advice guys, they are part of the Maximum Fun network. And then, there's a new company called, Gimlet Media, that's doing these news shows like they did, I'm trying to think. I keep thinking of the mystery show because that's their new one, but they did Startup and they've done, what's the other one? They've done 3 podcasts. I'm blanking on the third one, but the point is that there's these groups that are sort of getting together to produce content frequently, cross-promote each other's content. But also, not just these groups, but there's also individuals that are getting together and making podcasts. So we've got 2 guys around here. They're called Two Downies Dudes, and they basically, I don't even really know who they are. I know they live locally, and I know that like friends of friends know who they are. I'm not entirely sure of their names, but one of them is Robbie, and one of them, oh God, what's the other guy's name? But they get together and they talk about like what's going on in Down East Maine. So, like the tourist stuff, or they talk about new businesses, or they just talk about like, things that happened to them that week. They even have a rotating sort of cast of characters. So Ellsworth is a nearby, I guess city's too strong a word, but it's our county seat. It's where the court is. It's where all the chain stores are and that kind of thing. So Ellsworth is kind of like the center, right? So there's some characters that live in downtown Ellsworth, and they talk about them on the show. And I worked in downtown Ellsworth for a couple of years, and so they talk about these people and you know who they are, so it's like kind of funny. But even if you didn't know them, they just tell these ridiculous stories about, Pete's this guy who like washes windows, for example, and he says like really weird stuff under his breath, and he's kind of ridiculous, so they talk about him. And I think they've come up with little like personas for all of these characters. So anyway, it's interesting, but it's super local content. These guys like basically get together in one of their apartments and record this like once a week. So there's also plenty of room in the space, even if you're not a big media company. Like I said, the obvious benefits of being a group together versus being by yourself are obvious. But also, if you're independent, you get to, if you want to record a really long show, you can. If you want to come on Wednesday instead of on Monday, you can. So, there's some flexibility in being a small independent podcaster as well. And there's plenty of room in the space for that to happen too. So I'm trying to think of another. There's another one that's just come out, and I forget the name of it, so I'm gonna look it up really quick. But it's essentially it's this woman. The Unclassified Woman. So she's by herself, and basically she's a child-free podcast, which is like pretty niche in terms of content, but it's interesting that there's enough of an audience that justifies that there's a whole podcast about people who decide not to have kids. So anyway, so you can have groups of whatever, or you can have individual people who are putting out podcasts, and it runs the gamut. And if you just basically go on a website that has podcasts on it and just listen to 2 or 3 of them, you can see how different they are in terms of format, in terms of how they handle getting money, and in terms of sort of how much editorial control that the people who are producing it have. I will say it's kind of interesting. So I've also noticed that TV shows have been putting their audio feed on as podcasts. So for example, the Today Show, like I can listen to the audio of the Today Show. And what's kind of funny about that is that it's content that isn't, I mean, they normally have pictures, right? They normally have video and stuff like that. So sometimes as I'm listening to it, it'll be like, and when we come back, we're going to watch this incredible video about blah. And so, you just hear the audio of the incredible video. And sometimes just something gets lost in translation there. And even like television shows like 60 Minutes now is a podcast. So you can, if you aren't home at 6 p.m. on Sunday nights, or I forget what time it's on, you can just listen to the audio version of that television show. So I think it's interesting now too that not only are things moving toward television, but television is also moving to be a little bit more flexible in terms of, being just audio or having transcriptions available or having clips of TV shows available. So I think podcasts personally are pretty cool because as we all have what we feel like is less and less time, it makes sense that we would want a format that could travel easily, it fits on our phone. And I think what really has made sense in the last few years is that when podcasts first came out, you had to like download them ahead of time. So you had to be like, oh, I'm going to want to listen to This American Life when I'm driving. So I'm going to plug my iPod into my computer and download a bunch of episodes. But now with streaming services, I can decide to listen to something and be listening to it, 5 seconds later. I don't have to plug in my device and download it or something like that. So I think with these, streaming services like Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and I'm sure there's lots of other ways that you can listen to podcasts on apps on your smartphone. But because of that, you don't have to plan ahead like you used to. So I think it's a lot easier to be thinking about listening to podcasts when it's easier to listen to them. I had a couple of cool little facts. I might as well pull them up because about people who listen to podcasts, because a lot of times when I talk to people, they're like, oh, well, that's for young people or blah, blah, blah. And it's somewhat true, but in the last year, they say, 46 million Americans over the age of 12 now listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. So, so 2013, that was 12%. Now, or 17% of the U.S. population. Oh, no, okay, it's 17% up from 12%. I get it. So 5% increase in like the last year. So, it's a fair bit of people, but it's certainly not. It's not everyone. We can't assume that that you meet someone and that they've listened to a podcast, but you can assume that 20% of people are listening to podcasts, and 10% of the U.S. population listens to podcasts on a weekly basis. So I'm thinking that means that 10% of the U.S. population subscribes or listens to a certain podcast on a regular basis. So, one of the most popular ones is This American Life, but there's, like I said, there's tons of others too that maybe have smaller audiences, but maybe more niche-y audiences as well. And they say that podcast listeners tend to be younger, between the most typical ages between 12 and 34 years old. So I guess I am on the upper end of people who listen to podcasts. Although I have a feeling that when I turn 35, I won't suddenly stop listening to podcasts. They tend to be more tech savvy people. They tend to be online more than the average person, which I totally fit that bill. They tend to be educated. So I guess 25% of podcast listeners tend to have a college education, and 25% versus 10% of like regular internet users or something like that. So podcast listeners tend to be more educated, and they also tend to use social media really regularly. 56% use social media once to several times a day. So I totally fit all that criteria. Young, tech savvy, educated, social media user. That's me. That's not to say that other people can't listen to podcasts because they don't fit that mode, but those are the people who are among the most popular. What I'll link to that article when I post this video so that you can read it yourself. But about the different stats of the different people. But I thought that was pretty cool. And because this podcast listening audience is going up, and because Americans are becoming more interested in podcasts, I have a feeling that money definitely follows eyeballs, or I guess ear canals in this case. So I have a feeling that we'll see a lot more money to be had in podcasts, and because of that, there'll be even more interest in the next few years. So personally, I just think that it's interesting that we live in a world where we can learn things in different ways. Some people like to learn things with video. Some people like to learn things like audio. And I know I have I can retain stuff a lot when I hear it, especially if I can replay it, which you can with a podcast. We also have blog posts, written content. We also have lots of really great photos out there. So I think it's really neat that we live in an age where if you're interested in something, you can find a medium to learn about it that works for you, or a medium to, be entertained by it. And I guess I'll close this Tech Thursday with a few of my favorite podcasts. And what I thought would be interesting to do, because it's one of those things where if you like something, you're always looking for more things that you like. So if you have podcasts that you like, feel free to leave a comment on this video, because I'm always looking for more things to put on my radar. And there's only so many, articles about best podcasts for blah that someone can read in their life. So let me look at a few of my favorite ones. And I'll admit, some of them are a little cheesy, but that's okay. Let's see. So every week I always listen to, 1 second, I'm in my listen later, not my favorites. 1 second. So I love the advice ones, right? The advice ones are my brain candy. So advice shows include My Brother and Me, which their format is they go on Yahoo Answers. And you know how people ask really dumb questions on Yahoo Answers? They go find the dumbest questions and then they attempt to answer them. Dear Sugar, which is a column that was, I'm forgetting what website or it used to be on, but one of the sugars is Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the book Wild, and Steve Almond is the other sugar. They both wrote this column, so now they answer people's questions that write in. Dan Savage, Savage Love Cast. Basically anyone who gives advice about anything, I love listening to, especially if it's about something that I don't know anything about. So it could be about, someone who's calling in about health problems. So it could be, I'll listen to. And what I love about the audio format is I would never watch a doctor's video show, because I'd be afraid that they'd show me I don't mind blood, but watching someone cut into someone is what really gets to me. So that's why I can't watch the operations. Once everyone's all opened up and everything, and I know that no one's going to be cut, I'm okay. But something about watching someone get hurt or something like that, it just really bothers me. So, but I could listen to a medical podcast because I know I'm not going to see anything, right? But I just love the advice shows. Even for a while I was listening to this wedding planning talk show, and people were trying to start wedding planning businesses, and they'd write or call into this woman, and she would give them advice about starting their wedding planning business. But I just love people giving advice, because there's something so interesting about it, because you're learning something, but also, there's usually a story mixed in there as well. So I really like the advice show. So if you have a good advice show that I'm not listening to, please tell me. I love This American Life. I do. Sometimes it's so funny, because sometimes I get in this mood where for example, I know I have half an hour. So I don't want to start a 45-minute podcast, because I don't want to have to stop in the middle of it to go do what I have to do. So what I appreciate is that you can look and be oh, okay, this is going to be 15 minutes. This is going to work perfectly for my drive into work. It's not going to go over my drive into work. Let's see, what else do I listen to? I like the money ones too. I listen to Dave Ramsey. I, want to be completely debt free and all that. I think that's pretty cool. I was listening to Susie Orman when she was on too. I'm looking for, yeah, even like, so I'm married, but I still even listening to like dating advice and stuff because like I said, I love advice. I just think it's really interesting. I really like the business content too. I really like, like improving your business, improving yourself, any sort of self-improvement I'm kind of into. So if you have a good self-improvement type podcast or like business type podcast, I will totally listen to it. And even if it's a little bit cheesy, because like I said, I just really believe in self-improvement. I think that's like, I feel a big part of who I want to be is someone who's always getting better. So when I listen to things that like, are empowering and positive and they're like inspiring you to get better, I think that's a really, to me, a pretty good use of my time while I do the dishes. I don't mean to get so down on dishes. I just feel like they're never done. So anyway, those are a few of my favorite podcasts. If you have some, like I said, that you think I should be listening to, please leave them as a comment on this video, or the one person that's watching this at the moment, feel free to type them in the chat window. And yeah, so that is my take on podcasts. I would love to do one. So if you live locally and think that you could commit to recording a weekly podcast. So it would have to be at the same time every week-ish, or we'd have to make accommodations. So if you think you can make that kind of commitment, feel free to let me know. I've always considered, we have a local radio station called WERU, and it's a community-owned radio station. The problem is you have to physically go into the radio station to record your show. And the radio station is like a good hour drive away from me. And when you're starting out, of course, anybody who's ever had a radio show, they're not going to give you like, the really optimum time for you. You're going to have to like, okay, I guess I'm recording on Thursdays at 3 o'clock or something. And you're going to have to schlep it up there for Thursdays at 3 o'clock somehow. So that's the reason I've always hesitated with community radio stuff, just because you have to physically be in the studio. But what I like about the podcast idea is that you could set a time, record it, and then you can have it go online, when it's convenient for you. So if you're a local person and you'd be interested in doing a podcast with me, I would love that. That would be fun. I think we could do something pretty cool. But having like a one-person podcast, as with a one-person video, it's just inherently a little bit less interesting. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a little co-host type person so that we can record it together. So if you are into podcasting as much as I am and think we could make something beautiful together, please get in touch. So that's about podcasts. If you're thinking about making your message a little bit more reachable, putting in audio form is a great way to do it, especially if you've already recorded a video, or especially if you don't necessarily have time to type something up, but you would have time to record a short audio blast to put somewhere. So yeah, think about podcasting. And if you do start a podcast after watching this, please tell me what it is so I can listen to it, because I certainly listen to a lot of podcasts. I think I listen to them through Stitcher, and it tells you how many hours you've listened to Stitcher, and it's like, I think I'm close to 2,000 hours. Like, that's how much podcasts I've listened to in the last few years. So I listen to a lot. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you have any topics that you'd like us to talk about for Tech Thursday, pretty open to stuff, whether it's more technical or more kind of marketing or just sort of businessy. Those are kind of the three realms we like to exist in. Please leave a comment on this video, or you can go to breakingeveninc.com, click on the contact page, and you can just fill that out and it goes to us. So, and if you're in Bar Harbor, please come to our workshop tomorrow morning. It should be a really good time. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.